Hello, my name is Sara Potvin, and I have the privilege of participating in the University of Southern Maine's MBA Business Focused Study Tour to Vietnam in May 2014. As part of our trip, we will be discussing the business environment as it is today in Vietnam, as well as related sustainability challenges and potential solutions as the nation rapidly develops. One of our first challenges was to assess the marginal impact of our trip's flights and bus ride over our typical personal carbon emissions for the year. Once we found a credible calculator to assess our trip's impact, we were then challenged to commit to an attainable offset strategy. The goal is to become carbon neutral with respect to our trip. Even a brief search online reveals that long-haul flights, such as those we are taking to Vietnam, produce 10.4 tons of carbon dioxide per passenger. When compared with only 1.9 tons per car for a year's worth of commuting 100 miles a week in a standard passenger car, one quickly realizes the downside of a more mobile planet. I began my challenge by summarizing all of the legs of the trip in Vietnam. We will be taking a Concorde Coach Lines bus from Portland, Maine to Boston, Massachusetts. We will also be taking 3 round-trip plane rides, Boston to Tokyo, Tokyo to HCMC, HCMC to Da Nang, and all return flights. Then I researched the type of planes we would be flying in so that I could plug that information into a credible calculator to assess the marginal footprint of my trip. Note that we did not calculate for in-country travel, as we will be walking and taking public transportation, which would be in use by the general public in Vietnam, whether we were there or not. I began my search for a credible carbon calculator by locating a great study by Tufts University Climate Initiative, completed in 2007. This was a 53-page comprehensive study examining the quality of carbon offsets, offset project types, locations, offset company profiles, their air travel emissions calculators, the price per ton of their purchasable carbon offsets, and their ultimate recommendations and ratings of the companies they examined. You can see examples here of just 2 of the many factors they looked at: company structure and percentage of funds invested in the offset projects. This was the study's ultimate recommendation. The list continued with many other options, but I displayed only those companies here that they ultimately recommended. Based on their recommendation, I chose to use atmosphere for my plane calculations and ended up using native energy for the bus calculations, since atmosphere only calculated for plane travel. This is the visual of the bus trip calculation from Portland to Boston. I plugged in the Thompson's Point start address to the Boston Logan Airport and selected 2 times yearly for the frequency to yield a total CO2 produced of 0.04 tons. This is the visual of the round-trip plane ride from Boston to Tokyo. Note that they did not have an option on atmosphere to select Boeing 787, so I selected Boeing 777 ER, which stands for extended range, to get as close as possible on the calculation. This round-trip flight will produce 7.53 tons of CO2. This is the visual of the round-trip plane ride from Tokyo to HCMC on a Boeing 767. This round-trip flight will produce 2.48 tons of CO2. This is the visual of the round-trip plane ride from HCMC to Da Nang on an Airbus 321. This round-trip flight will produce 0.38 tons of CO2. In total, my marginal carbon footprint is 10.43 tons of CO2 emissions. In the spirit of conservatism regarding my offset strategy, I rounded up to 11 tons. Having participated in a energy study tour to Denmark last year, I already had many ideas on how to offset my marginal carbon footprint for Vietnam. For further ideas, however, I found carbonfund.org. They suggested many ways to reduce my carbon footprint, including daily travel through carpooling, walking, and biking. And I already carpool for work nearly every day and walk and bike whenever I can. Next, they suggested that I use Energy Star appliances and change my light bulbs to CFLs in the house. I have already taken those steps in my home. They also suggested water-efficient toilets, faucets, and insulation to reduce heating and cooling needs. As I am a renter at the moment, those are not choices that I have control over, but when I become a homeowner, I will. Then they suggested that I recycle, stop junk mail, buy local, and eat less meat, all steps I take today. Finally, they suggested purchasing a carbon offset. This was the strategy I decided upon. I used native energy to calculate the price of purchasing an offset of my 11 tons of CO2 emissions. The total cost to me would be $154. They even allow one to make much more manageable monthly payments of only $12.87, less than I pay for Netflix. I plan to purchase my offset as soon as possible upon the conclusion of our trip to Vietnam, and I look forward to a life-changing and sustainable trip abroad. Thank you.